code. Okay, just go to the next slide. Can we please go down to the QR code for starting? I'm sorry, if you display the presentation on the QR.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm pharmacist Felix Ingabire. I'll be talking on behalf of Dr. Merawi. And as I share my screen, I want to confirm if someone can confirm seeing my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen. You can go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So I'll be taking you through the highlights of the COVID-19 situation and the AFCOR supply chain technical group activities for the response. So globally, as of 18 July 2020, 9 a.m. East African time, we are having 12.9 million confirmed cases globally, and we've lost more than 570,000 lives to COVID-19, and more than 215 countries and territories have been affected. If you look at the epidemiological situation in Africa, COVID-19 has been increasing rapidly, especially since the last couple of 3 months. The last couple of months or 3 months. And now we are having more than 623 cases in Africa. And we're having more than 13,000 cases in Africa with a case fatality rate of around 2.2%. We've also had more than 315,000 recoveries as of now. So if we look at the 5 regions of Africa, we may see that the most affected region is the southern region. That's row number 2nd from the bottom, with more than 300,000 cases, followed by the northern region that has more than 126 cases. Then we have 41,000 cases in central, 48,000 cases in eastern region, and we have more than 98,000 cases in the western region. Overall, the cumulative case fatality rate in Africa, as said, is around 2.2%, but it goes around 4.3% in the northern region. So briefly, this is the epidemiological situation in Africa. And now, as you may have seen it or learned about it, Africa's strategy has been grounded on 3 pillars that are preventing transmission, death, and social harm. And now, in these 3 pillars, the 2 pillars, they call for procurement of surveillance, diagnostic, and IPC supplies. So the next slide we'll be talking about what the technical working group on supply chain have been doing around procuring surveillance, diagnostics, and IPC supplies, because it's required in preventing transmission and also in preventing deaths. The first and the second pillars. So when COVID-19 was struck, the first thing we did was to sit down and using the models that were available to quantify what could be needed as supplies. Then we used the Imperial College of London's model to predict what could be the attack rate for the continent, the spectrum of disease. Then we came up to estimate the IPC, critical care equipment and lab equipment and testing reagents that would be required for a 1-year response. Then after we estimated what was required, then we saw that Africa CDC alone would cover something ranging between 5 and 10% to help member states cover the gaps that they had in supply chain of these commodities that would be needed. So after that, then we procured initially required supplies, especially the testing kits. So we used some of our partners, namely AFNet and UNICEF, to procure the initial critically required supplies. Then we activated the African Union emergency procurement procedure, and we continue to procure required medical commodities through the African Union procurement channels, as also we continue to explore partners' help in procuring supply chain, procuring supplies that were needed. So then further down the road, we participated in the development of the Africa Supplies Procurement Platform, which is still work in progress. But we started testing the platform because now it's become operational. And we launched our first procurement bid using the Africa Supply Procurement Platform, although some discussions are ongoing about aligning the platform operations with the African Union procurement rules and regulations. Also, we are lucky to receive some donations, especially from Alibaba and Jack Ma foundations. And we have some other donations that are in pipeline, namely from Korea, South Korea, from Germany, from Morocco, that are still coming in to help with getting enough COVID-19 supplies needed. So talking briefly about the supply procurement, this is something we are looking at as something that will help with the supply chain activities, because it's allowing a global manufacturer base where we know who's manufacturing what, and also it allows volume aggregation, especially for our African countries. Then it allows quota management, payment facilitation, and it has a component also to facilitate logistics. Those who are involved in supply chain, especially the IPC logistics team, they may know how they play, or they may have even tested the platform. It's something that is making the supply chain simpler. So in terms of distribution and logistics, we continue to procure and distribute IPC critical care equipment and laboratory equipment and testing reagents to member states and to AU missions. As I said, we received and distributed Alibaba and Jack Ma Foundation's donation. And I'm happy to report that all the African Union member states have received their quotas on time. We have also been liaising with different logistics partners to ensure strategic movements of these supplies. We thank Ethiopian Airlines Cargo for their support on that. We thank also World Food Program. We thank different partners like DHL who have been who have facilitated these movements and the distribution of the supplies. As I said, also we supported different African Union missions in partnership with the Peace and Security Department. We have different missions in Somalia and elsewhere, so we supported them to get the IPC supplies that are required to curb the spread of the pandemic. And also we continued to provide African Union and Africa CDC staff with these protective equipment on both at workplace and at their homes. So we provide long-term support to member states. So we developed a harmonization pager to coordinate support that is being provided to member states by different partners. So we're trying to streamline how different partners are moving their support, especially in terms of supplies, medical commodities that are being shipped to different countries. We're trying to harmonize how different partners do ship these things to different countries. Also, we have started and we continue to map out manufacturers of COVID-19 supplies, especially on the African continent. And our partner, ADN-EPAD, is leading these efforts. We have many activities in the pipeline, namely developing modules for the training about supply chain management. And also we are recruiting a team of epidemiologists that will help countries in their effort to deal with supply chain and curb the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in general. So I thank you very much. I knew I had 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Let's keep safe and let's keep washing our hands and keep IPC measures every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felix. We appreciate that. If there's any questions, we'll ask the questions at the end of the session. I would like to introduce Professor Folosad Ogansolo, which is the chair of ICAN, and she's going to give us a presentation on transportation industry during this COVID process. Thank you, Professor Shadai. Prof. Shadai.
Sorry for that, you're done.
Prof. Shadai?
Yes, I can. Yes, sorry, I was trying to unmute. Let me.
Okay, you can share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to, I think, the last in the series for this round of webinars. Today I'll be talking about airports, airlines, trains and buses, interventions for safety. So I can move quickly. Over 4.5 billion passengers traveled globally in 2019, and 76.6 million of these were to and from Africa. As of today, Africa has 731 airports and 419 airlines. And what we recognize is the potential for transmission within airlines, that the confined environment increases the potential risk of infection, especially for droplet and airborne infections. We know that global travel allows for new diseases to spread rapidly. And if we remember, in 2003, SARS killed about over 80,000 people in 37 countries. In 2009, H1N1 was estimated to have affected 200 million individuals, even though we only had about 18.6 million laboratory confirmed people, and an estimated 150 to 500,000 deaths in its first year. Come forward to 2020, COVID-19, in the last 6 to 7 months, we've had 12.9 million confirmed cases as of yesterday afternoon, with 492,000 plus of those in Africa, and 570.288 deaths all over the world. What is quite clear is air travel promotes the spread of infections. And in the last few weeks, we're hearing of easing of transportation, and many countries are beginning to think of flying again. Sorry. Okay. The thing about airports and airlines is that they create an environment for close contact with individuals for extended periods of time. Most passengers have to arrive about 2 to 3 hours before their flights. And this close contact for extended is while seated prior to boarding. You have close contact with people in your neighboring gates while waiting to board, and close contact on many queues, security screening, checking in and waiting in restrooms, queuing at airport shops, queuing in jetway spaces as you board the airplane and as you disembark in baggage claim. The risk of transmission in aircraft. The risk of transmission while in airplane is considered low because of its ventilation system. And it's considered that those close to the person infected are more at risk within 2 rows on all sides, including its own. So if you look at this dark dot, what you see is, assume this is an infected passenger. That risk is 2 rows ahead, 2 rows behind, 2 rows to the side, and 2 rows to. So these are considered the people most at risk. The same thing here. So these areas are considered those most at risk. One other thing is airlines, in general, the risk is greatly reduced for passengers seated about 15 seats from the infectious source. And airlines do not allow known infected cases or those with infectious diseases to go on board. Some of the factors that we know would affect transmission risk of COVID in aircrafts include many people in close proximity in a closed space, number of organisms that are expelled into the air, the concentration of organisms, which would be the volume of airspace and ventilation, would be affected by volume of the airspace and ventilation, the proximity to the source of infection, the immune status of the exposed person, the duration of exposure, and the airflow system, in other words, the ventilation within the aircraft. The airflow in aircraft, it's important for us to understand it, to understand what the risks are. Airflow in aircraft, the cabin air circulation is a continuous system, and the air is always flowing into and out of the cabin with a mix of approximately 50% of outside air and 50% of filtered recirculated air. And so it tends to come from the top and goes out at the bottom near the feet of passengers. There is usually between 15 to 20 cubic feet of total air supply per minute per person in economic class, and this is increased in the business class, and about 20 to 30 air changes per hour in the aircraft. The total air supply is essentially, and I use that in inverted commas, sterile and particle-free, because most modern airplanes have air filtration systems with HEPA filters that can efficiently remove about 99.97% of particles at 0.3 microns, which will remove about 99% of microorganisms. The other part of it is that direction. The air circulation patterns are laminar, side to side. So they enter from the overhead and circulate and then exit near the flow, so that there's very little front to back longitudinal airflow. The air circulation is also designed to design in such a way that it works in sections, so that it's usually about every 7 rows. Thereby, it limits the spread of airborne particles to very far within the airline. The airflow, this airflow is also what provides the temperature control and minimizes temperature gradients within the cabin. So what happens in the cabin when we cough? This is from a study that was done in 2011. And it was really looking at what could happen in the case of maybe TB, that is an airborne infection as well. So it looked and traced droplets that were exhaled from a single cough. So this is what happened at 0. That little red dot in the middle there is a passenger who coughed. So the droplets were contained in the row before, at, and after the index case within 30 seconds. So this is the index case. At 5 seconds, you can see that it has gone just above the head of the index case. At about 10 seconds, it had spread to behind the index case. By 15 seconds, you cannot see too much of it again. So by 4 minutes, it's so that's about here. It's universally dispersed sorry, and within 1 minute, the total airborne droplet fraction had reduced by 48%. And by 4 minutes, only 12% of the total droplet fraction was still airborne. However, because this happens within about 30 seconds, the row before and behind, it means that those around that index person are more at risk of getting infections from one cough that this patient gives. And this is just showing it by side view. So that's the patient. You'll see it first goes up, then it is dispersed, and then goes down as it follows the circulation. At 20 seconds, it's much more dispersed. At 30 seconds, you can see this is the patient, the passenger. A lot of it is going backward rather than forwards. By 60 seconds, it's much more dispersed, and by 44 minutes, you're not seeing a lot of it again. It's very faint. So the airlines and the cab and the ventilation is designed to try and minimize the risk for transmission. It is not an absolute zero, but it is minimized. And some of the other things that are considered to reduce the risk of infection in the airline include things like all the passengers are facing forward so that there's limited face-to-face interaction. The seats may provide a barrier unless when you cough. The airflow is from the ceiling to the floor so that it further reduces the potential for transmission. The high airflow rates that allow for constant change also assist in this risk reduction. And the HEPA filters that filter out the air in the cabin are also an added layer. A number of guidance documents have come out that would assist in improving even this already what people used to consider low risk of transmission in the airlines, because it has been considered that a lot of the infections may actually occur within the airport when people are mixing a lot, and less of it online. I mean, yes. So the guidance documents essentially address the following: contact reduction measures. How do you reduce crowds? How do you reduce people coming in contact with each other? Good hygiene, promoting good hygiene, cough etiquette to reduce the dispersal of droplets into the air, physical distancing, good hand hygiene, and how to avoid touching your face with unclean hands, because there are lots of surfaces that are touched within the terminal and online. And very importantly, keeping the infected and sick people off the airline. If there's no infected person, then there's nothing to talk about. You can only transmit what exists. The airline response is based on 5 strategies. They will essentially be doing exactly the same things, but as depending on the situation, how much is implemented will depend on the situation in countries. So there's a stage 0, which we were in before, where there was full travel restrictions with only minimal movement of passengers between major domestic and international airports. Then stage 1, an initial increase of passenger travel. This is the stage that we're beginning to move into, and it will coincide with relatively low passenger volumes, which will allow airlines and airports to introduce aviation public health practices. There'll be significant challenges for the communities to adopt and adapt to the increased demands and the new operational challenges that are associated with risk mitigations. And there'll be health measures for travel required at airports, which will need to, at a minimum, match those that are in the local modes of transport and infrastructure. Then stage 2, there will be continuing increasing load. There'll be some reduced transmission threats from improved containment, and some restrictions might be lifted. In stage 3, containment is considered sufficient to reduce national risk levels. There'll be good testing and contact tracing, even though there might be no vaccine or drugs. In stage 4 is where it is expected that there will be some interventions, that there will be a vaccine, and that there will be drugs, and a lot more of these restrictions will be lifted. At the present time, we're moving into stage 1. And the general considerations for infection control will include public education, contact reduction measures, face coverings and masks. In most African countries, face coverings in public is now mandatory. Environmental cleaning and disinfection, health screening, and this will be accompanied by contact tracing of exposed people if on board. So at the airports, a lot of these will be contact reduction strategies. There'll be administrative controls to minimize the crowd. There'll be increased pre-airport activities, also about the contact reduction strategies. As many things that can be done before the passenger arrives at the airport will be done. Improving engineering controls to reduce contacts within the airport, and to screen out the sick and keep passengers and staff safe. So pre-arrival at the airport, online checking in will be encouraged more and more, and in some places might be mandatory, except it can be avoided. Except there's a reason. Health screening forms and information on COVID-19 signs and symptoms should accompany tickets, and the forms that are filled online should be sent back and submitted prior to the date of travel, so that aircrafts can decide whether you're fit to travel or not. There should be advanced information to limit accompanying persons to the airport, that they will not be accepted, so that there's no problem, you just drop off your passenger. Passengers may be required to arrive at the airport masked, and the required number of masks may be required to have extra masks with you. They may also be advised, or will be advised, on longer screening processes. At the airports, passengers may be scheduled to arrive at different times to reduce crowds. There might be additional outdoor waiting areas provided so that the terminals are not full of people. Curbside baggage drop-off may be increased to reduce waiting time in departure lounges. Increased signages to encourage passenger flows and to show them where they're going and what to do. And also for infection control measures about cough etiquette, about physical distancing, and so on. There will be floor signages as well to encourage physical distancing and show you where to stand. Physical barriers could be installed at counters to protect staff that interact with passengers. So there could be plexiglass barriers so that you don't have direct face-to-face interactions. Seats may be removed or separated to create adequate distances between passengers. And passengers could be encouraged to check in all luggage, including their hand luggage. And they might only be allowed to have bags that can fit under their seat. This is so that there's no need to be crossing over, standing up during the flight to take things from the hold. Hand sanitizers will be at various places in the airport, and there will be constant public awareness information from posters and electronic media. Also at the airport, there will be passenger screening at some airports. Only passengers that have been cleared to fly would be allowed to come to the airport, and they may be required to have their temperature taken. The sensitivity for this, it's important to mention this, for identifying passengers that are infected with COVID-19 may be limited, since a lot of infected people may transmit the virus before they are symptomatic. The screening areas should preferably be before entering to the departure lounge, but sometimes it will be just as one enters. The staff taking the temperature should use a non-contact thermometer and have no contact with the passengers. They should maintain at least a 1.5 distance from the passenger and should preferably be behind a barrier. The screening area should have hand sanitizers, and all passengers with temperatures greater or equal to 38 degrees centigrade will be referred for further screening at the airport facilities. And the staff screening must be masked. At checking in, immigration, ticketing, transit, and ticketing up desks for embarkation, these are places where long queues occur. So it is better to try and have all forms needed to have been filled before arrival at the airport, because these are again the things that cause delay. And have automated check-in where possible. There should be floor signage to create physical distancing, and signage in prominent places focused on good hygiene practices and physical distancing. There should be signage on masking. Passengers would need to board by rows, with the last rows boarding first, and passengers would stay seated till their rows are called. So the issue of passengers standing and waiting for the row so that people are hitting each other should not arise. On board of the aircraft, all passengers should be masked. Passengers should stay seated unless it is essential to do otherwise. The cabin crews should include COVID-19 preventive messages in their safety demonstrations. There should be guidance material on good hygiene practices, physical distancing, minimizing contact with surfaces, hand hygiene, etc. And there should be measures to limit contact between crew and passengers. E.g., online duty-free may be stopped, and passengers encouraged to purchase online before flying. On board, duty-free may be stopped. In addition, food may be pre-packed, and passengers may pick this up before they enter the flight. And these will depend on what kind of flights, whether they're short, whether they're long. Passengers would be encouraged to use the toilets closest to them where possible. And one toilet should be reserved for staff if this is possible. And there should be a protocol for managing passengers that are ill and unruly passengers. Every aircraft should have what you call a universal precautions kit, which will contain dry powder that can convert small liquid spills into sterile granulated gel. They would have disinfectant wipes for surface cleaning. They would have face and eye masks, and eye protections. They would have goggles, medical masks, or combined. They would have face shields. They would have disposable gloves, protective aprons, full-length long-sleeve gowns, and biohazard disposable waste bags, if available. All these are the things that should be inside the universal precautions kit. So how do you manage an ill passenger? If a passenger develops symptoms during a flight, the first thing is to ask that ill person to wear a medical mask so that you can contain the droplets. And you ask to practice respiratory hygiene when coughing or sneezing. Tissue should be provided to cover the mouth and nose if the person cannot tolerate the mask. And this should be discarded immediately into a biohazard disposable waste bag or plastic bag. The ill person should be separated from other passengers by a minimum of 1 meter. Usually about 2 seats should be left empty in all directions, depending on the cabin design. And it is always better that other passengers are moved away rather than moving that ill person away, because then there's a potential for contamination of other spaces. One crew member should be designated to look after the ill person or ill persons, preferably one trained in infection prevention and control. If possible, one toilet should be designated for use only by the ill person, and personnel in close contact with a symptomatic person should, when providing first aid, should wear a medical mask, eye protection, face shield, or goggles and gown, and wear disposable gloves when tending to the ill traveler or touching body fluids or potentially contaminated objects and surfaces. Gloves should be removed carefully and disposed of in a biohazard bag. Hands should be washed with soap and water or alcohol-based hand rub if not visibly dirty. The crew should also make sure not to touch other service utensils or cutlery after tending to an ill traveler. Crew members need to be provided with instructions for communicating with an ill person suspected of COVID-19. It's also important for crew members to be aware that it is okay to touch or comfort a suspected or confirmed COVID-19 case on the condition that they're wearing appropriate PPE. What you want is to have a passenger that is not agitated and may cause a problem for other passengers. Once an ill passenger is recognized, pilots must inform the airport control as early as possible before arrival at the destination airport. For arriving and transiting passengers at disembarkation, passengers should stay seated till their row is asked to disembark. The practice of getting up the minute the airline has landed to take hand luggage is not advised. Disembarkation will be by rows from the front to the back to avoid people crossing over. The other area that a lot of people do is dropping one's hand luggage in a row that's not your own and then moving to collect it. All those are discouraged. And to reduce waiting times at border controls, forms should be distributed and filled on board. And airports should try as much as possible to create as many booths as possible for border control to reduce queuing times and contact times for people. There should also be adequate signage promoting preventive messages and patient flow at airports at arrival. Floor signages should also be there to ensure physical distancing by at least 1 to 2 meters apart. The access to arrival halls should be limited to staff, crew, and arriving passengers. So the practice of family members and people waiting for passengers inside arrival halls is discouraged. Family members should be encouraged to wait in their cars or designated outdoor areas where physical distancing is assured. Passengers are encouraged to exit immediately, and airport trolleys should be cleaned after use by wiping down with 60% alcohol. Disembarkation of suspect cases. Personnel should wear a medical mask, eye protection, gloves, and gown when loading suspected COVID-19 patients into the air ambulance and perform hand hygiene. If more than one suspected case is being disembarked, personnel should change their PPE between each patient to avoid possible cross-contamination. This is important because we do not know whether the patient has COVID or not. So the fact that the patient is ill does not mean he has COVID. He might be coughing, one might have COVID, another might not. So it is important that there is no cross-contamination between suspected patients as well. They should be treated as suspect cases. The driver of the ambulance should not move close to the suspect, nor be involved in loading them into the ambulance. And if there is no contact with infected patients, the driver does not require PPE. But we do know that sometimes the drivers have to assist, and if the driver assists with loading suspected COVID-19 patients, he should wear the appropriate PPE, including the mask, the gloves, the gown, and eye protection. And he should doff this and put them in a biohazard bag before re-entering the driver's compartment. The transport staff should frequently clean their hands with alcohol-based hand rub before putting on PPE and removing PPE for disembarking their suspect cases. All used PPE should be disposed of as infectious waste. Symptomatic travelers will be assessed at the designated facilities of the airport and transferred to a designated healthcare facility. Contacts will then be followed up according to instructions from the local and public health agencies. Crew members. For crew members who will be handling passengers, there has to be training of all crew members prior to flights. And not just the crew members, but also the ground staff, in recognition of signs and symptoms of COVID-19, on prevention strategies, physical distancing, on how to seek medical advice early if they themselves develop signs and symptoms suggestive of COVID, how to doff and don personal protective equipment, how to handle sick persons to prevent transmission to others. They also need to be trained on how to avoid being infected while they're in the community, that they should avoid rush hours in public transport and use private transport when possible. They should minimize the time spent in public areas, applying social distancing when out in the public. They should wash their hands frequently with soap and water or use an alcohol-based hand rub if hands are not visibly dirty. They should avoid touching their eyes and noses. They should be taught how to self-monitor and to immediately isolate themselves according to their local health procedures, and wear a mask and report the situation to the employer and seek medical attention. The airline operator must report to local health authorities immediately. If symptoms develop during a flight for the crew staff, they should wear a medical mask, discontinue their duties as soon as it is safe to do so, and inform the other crew members. And this must be reported to airport controls, and follow the measures required for a suspected case. PPE for crew members will be on the basis of risk. The cabin crews should minimize interactions with passengers, and they should all be masked, but they may require gloves, gown, and eye protection depending on the level of contact with passengers. Cleaning. There should be a plan for enhanced cleaning and disinfection, and all crew and ground staff must be aware of the plan. They should ensure that all cleaning staff can dilute disinfectants, and frequently touched surfaces should be cleaned more often. In the airport, these include information desks, passengers with reduced mobility desks, check-in areas, immigration and customs areas, security screening areas and boarding areas, escalators and lifts, handrails, washrooms, toilets and baby changing areas, luggage trolleys and collection points, and these should be cleaned with disposable wet wipes or disinfectants and disposed of safely. Seats prior to security screening and in boarding and check-in areas, and parking shuttle buses and airside buses. All these are areas where that are high-touch places. The cleaning of aircraft, this should be done during short layovers, and special attention should be given to high-touch areas, shared facilities, and if there was a suspect case, the zone of risk in the cabin area, which will be around the 2 rows ahead, 2 rows behind in all directions, as I showed in the picture ahead before. And these areas need to be cleaned and disinfected. In addition, the seats, the headrests, tabletops, handsets, windows, window shades that are around video monitors need to be cleaned. And then other materials that came in contact with a suspected case, including the toilets, need to be cleaned, deep cleaned. So after the exposure, all cleaning staff need to wear their PPE. The surfaces must be wiped with disinfectant. The disinfectant must not be corrosive or detrimental to aircraft components, and they should be applied according to the label instructions, including the concentration, the method, and the contact time. There should be no spraying of disinfectants in the aircraft. And that while cleaning, ventilation systems should be kept running while cleaning crews are working aboard the airplane. Surfaces in the, if there has been a symptomatic case in the airport, surfaces should be cleaned with detergent followed by regular household disinfectants containing 0.1% sodium hypochlorite. Surfaces should be rinsed with clean water after 10 minutes contact time for chlorine. In case a surface has been soiled with respiratory secretions or other body fluids, this should be wiped with absorbent paper towels, disposed of, and then cleaned and disinfected. Any contaminated items, e.g. hand towels, gloves, masks, should all be placed in a disposable bag and disposed of as infectious waste. Ambulance or transport vehicles should be cleaned and disinfected with regular household disinfectants, containing 0.5% sodium hydrochloride. And the contact time should be at least 1 minute, then rinsed off with clean water. As an alternative to bleach, ambulances may use hospital-grade disinfectant products according to manufacturers' instructions. Possible transmission risk reduction aspects of transmission in airlines are therefore: passengers face forward with limited face-to-face interactions. The seats provide a barrier to transmission between rows. The airflow from ceiling to floor further reduces the potential for transmission. High airflow rates reduce spread in the same way as in other indoor environments. The high efficiency particulate air filters on modern aircraft help to keep air clean with high fresh air levels as well. And so the risk for reduction in aircraft are not only in terms of physical distancing, but are also related to the ventilation flow and the way passengers interact on the airplane. So talking about public transportation, buses, trains, and we have all sorts of buses. We have the mass transit, the large ones. We have the small ones that look like this. We have trains. We have those that are similar to this with a lot of overcrowding. A lot of what needs to be done are similar, whether they're trains or they're buses. In general, the advice is not to use public transport if you're feeling unwell, except in an emergency. All passengers in public transportation should be masked. People most at risk, older age or those with underlying disease, should avoid public transport if possible. If not, they should avoid rush hours and should use a medical mask if they must go out. Passengers experiencing any symptoms that may be caused by COVID-19 must not travel on public transport and are encouraged to seek medical assistance as soon as possible. All passengers should maintain physical distances as much as possible. While transporting passengers, operators are encouraged should encourage passengers to maximize physical distancing. Operators should, where possible, operate at less than full capacity. 60% has been suggested. This has not worked particularly well because it also translates to economic adversity. And so most operators have not done this. In addition, even airlines are resisting minimizing, stopping, making some seats unavailable for seating. And so these are problems with this industry because there's also a major impact on economic recovery. Windows should, as much as possible, be kept open. If there is air conditioning, one should consider turning it off. But if this is not practical, to open windows so that there's a mix of fresh air coming in, despite the fact that the air conditions are on. There should be a restricted access to areas immediately around the drivers, e.g. the first row of seats and buses in large transport buses. And if appropriate and possible, request passengers to enter and exit through separate doors to allow for unidirectional flow throughout the carriage. This is more possible in trains and in large buses. At passenger terminals and platforms, you should ensure cleaning and sanitizing of high-touch areas and bathrooms, increasing the frequency that this is done. Provide appropriate signages to point to available hygiene facilities, e.g. the bathrooms, hand sanitizer dispensers. Consider passenger movement flow around the terminal and platform that supports the above, and ensure queuing in open air with at least 1 meter apart. In most places in Africa, the transport terminals are open air. People queue outside. So what is required is to also ensure some physical distancing. And all passengers are encouraged to be masked. Cleaning and hygiene in these areas, there should be signage and posters displayed at terminals and stations and inside vehicles to encourage passengers to practice good hygiene before, during, and after using public transport. They should ensure cleaning and sanitizing of all surfaces, doors, bathrooms, and high traffic or high touch areas. They should provide additional hand sanitizers for workers and passengers where possible, and put in place procedures to monitor the health of all employees and provide training and regular communication on symptoms and actions to perform if unwell, with at least daily reporting or check-ins by supervisors. They should ensure workers do not attend work if feeling unwell. They should ensure all workers are advised of workplace hygiene standards and are maintaining good hand washing and cough hygiene. They should ensure all workers maintain physical distancing and avoid sharing equipment wherever possible. Some of the greatest problems are amongst workers because they tend to be less worried amongst themselves, but more worried with passengers. There should be a regular monitoring and review of all the hygiene measures implemented to ensure that they're being followed and remain effective. PPE. It is not recommended that PPE such as gloves and eye protection or face masks are routinely used out of healthcare settings to protect against, that's medical masks, against COVID-19. But you should wear face coverings on public transport. If you're of increased risk of severe illness, take private transportation. And I keep emphasizing this, or avoid peak periods. If infected, avoid public transportation and use a medical mask if you're infected. Where there's community spread, a barrier such as perspex or glass can be installed to protect the staff. Finally, as much as possible during this COVID-19 era, we should avoid non-essential travel by air, by road, by train, or by sea. Avoid buses and trains, especially if you're above 60 or have underlying disease. Should wash your hands frequently or use an alcohol hand rub. Avoid touching your face and maintain physical distancing and wear a mask whenever you are in public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ogunzolo. I want to hand over to Africa CDC, Mohammed. You will take us through the possible questions that there is. I see there's quite a few in the open box for Prof and then also for Felix. Thank you, over.
Oh, thank you very much, Anna. I really want to thank both Professor Shade and Felix for the wonderful presentation. And from the volume of questions we are generating, I will think it was well received. So let me take you through. In case the internet problem happens here, Anna, you can take over from me. So we have quite a series of questions, and let me start by throwing some to Professor Shade. Jacob asks that the proposed precautions are good, but what about overcrowding in the airports, especially those that connects to the connecting airports? Can we encourage direct flights as much as possible? But maybe you can address the first part of the question. I know subsequently in your presentation you were able to, but can you give him some more stress on how to avoid overcrowding when you find yourself in any of these airports? Over, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll first take the overcrowding at the airport. Part of the measures that are taken are how do you stop people from congregating in those areas that things are done. So things like before you get down from the airport, fill all the forms so that when you get to the border control, you don't have to, first of all, bunch together, collecting forms, filling, things will move more swiftly. The whole idea is to try and move people quickly through the airport. That's one. Then there will be signages, things that, signages on the, and floor signages where you can stand to create that space between people. There will be, as much as possible, the idea is if it is possible to increase the number of booths of border control people or at check-in, so that there's a reduction of people lining up and queuing up in front of them. It will be difficult to stop crowds totally in airports, and that's one of the reasons why the idea of masking in this in the airports has been muted, and it has been accepted basically that everybody should be masked, because this is a high volume place. And what you only try to do is, one, reduce the increase the distance between people. One other way that has been looked at is in terms of transit passengers. There are some countries that have agreements between themselves. So if they have been, if you're going from one such country, for example, maybe between Europe, countries in Europe, and you're transiting maybe from the UK to a country in Europe, and you're going through another country in Europe, rather than first go through border control, you would be allowed to just go straight, so that you don't have to go through that intersection, so that intermediate checking in part will not be for everybody, but for those who must go through that. So there will be challenges, but the good thing is that as we start, there are fewer passengers, and it will give time for airports and aircraft to get all their activities right. I don't know if that's helped.
Thank you very much, Professor Shade. I will get back to you in a minute, but let's, I think, let me ask Elizabeth this question, or any other person can support her. And this question is coming up a lot, even in different African countries, from what we're hearing. Where countries are requesting for testing before boarding. So Francis asks, is there any need for COVID-19 test result before boarding? Some airlines are requesting it. Can Elizabeth use that experience to provide more insight into this? Over.
Sure. Hi, this is Elizabeth Bancroft from US CDC. It's an interesting question. At this time, we, at least at CDC, do not recommend that. The test will not capture every single person who has COVID. You really need to do IPC anyway. It is not always required by the countries that you're going to. You know, different countries have different requirements. Many of them will say that they want to have a test at least 3 days ahead of time, you know, before entering into the country. We don't have a lot of great technology yet to be able to have a test and be able to give the result back immediately to a traveler to let them know whether or not they can or can't enter the plane. You know, it'd be very hard to do that and to do it safely and productively at airports. Plus, as you know, the testing, I mean, this is my opinion, the testing supplies are so limited. I think a lot of us would really like to have those testing supplies for our patients that are in hospitals, where the test results might really make a difference in the patient care, as opposed to having test results for people who are potentially asymptomatic and entering a plane. So those would be the reasons right now where I think testing for people entering planes or entering other public transportation would not necessarily be recommended. Over.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Professor Shade, I'm going to lump 3 questions into one for you. It's mainly on long distance flights, and
yes.
How will social distancing in airline be maintained? You hit on it, but maybe just a little bit more emphasis. Is there a regulation on number of passengers per plane size as we enter the stage 1 risk phase? And Kongwani also is asking, will passengers wear masks throughout the flight? And are there any reason why they should not wear masks throughout the flight? The last one was added by me. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I think we're actually moving in, I use the word sort of uncharted territory. It will be difficult in terms of for social distancing, the way we know it to be done, without actually doing something like every other seat should be free. However, if we do that, there's an economic cost. One, the flights, the cost of airlines will go astronomically up so that people will not be able to travel. But more importantly, I think what we need to look at, and which was why I went into it earlier on, is that the risk, and this is pre-COVID-19, looking at SARS, looking at TB and so on, the risk for transmission is low on airlines because of their ventilation system, or is lower than you would expect for such a space. And so, and there are, there are various levels of ensuring safety beyond when you enter the into the airline. The first one is trying to keep those who are ill out. We know that's a problem with COVID-19 because they're not symptomatic. The second is that a lot of the infections appear to occur in the airport where people are jostling and moving around. And the third is when you do enter the cabin, the airflow is such that it actually reduces the risk of transmission from, except in your immediate vicinity. And that is why a lot of aircrafts now say wear a mask, because that's an added layer of protection. There was a study, there was a report recently of a patient who was symptomatic, had on his mask, traveled, I think, from China to Toronto. I can't remember very well. I think it was Schwarzer et al. And no one got COVID. So there might be other reports. And I know that during the MERS period, there might have been, there were outbreaks then, but certainly this report showed that the patients did not get COVID. It's one study, but it also still speaks to the fact that source control is important. So I think right now the airlines are more in favor of adding that extra layer of a mask for passengers. Now, concerning should I wear a mask throughout? Clearly, if you're on a long haul flight, you're going to eat. So it's not going to be an absolute, it will be very difficult to say the mask will be on throughout. A number of advice has been to have more than one mask, so that when you take off that mask, you put it into your biohazard bag and wear another one after eating. It will not be an absolute. So that's why there's always an element of risk, and the whole idea is to minimize this risk. I don't know if anybody else has anything they would like to add to that.
Oh, thank you, Prof. We are still coming back to you, quite a number of questions, but let's, Felix, there is a question, Felix, you're online. There's a question for you here. I will paraphrase that question just to make it very relevant here. The question is, what precautions do you take when you receive packages, logistics? You talked about Jacmal and all those to ensure that you're safe. So the person is concerned about maybe some of the packages may, when you receive them, could have a decent, you keep them in the sun or something. And I think Prof. Shade, you may also want to talk about this, any risk involved getting, when you are receiving packages from countries that are known to have high infection. So Felix, you want to go first, then Prof. will take over. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. The question is very pertinent. So let me first say that whenever there is a suspected package, it should be disinfected whenever possible. Packages are different, and they are packaged in different forms and shapes and manners. But whenever there is a suspected package, it should be disinfected and do it as much as possible. Then practically, some packages may not be easy to disinfect. Let's say, for instance, food packages. But good thing is what have been always insisted on about hand hygiene, and whenever you touch something, then remember to do proper hygiene. Yeah, briefly, I would respond that, but maybe Prof would add something over.
Professor Shade,
Yes.
you want to? Yeah.
Sorry, can you tell me what's happening? Can you give me the
So
question?
when you are receiving packages from whatever source, and maybe even some of these logistics things you receive from planes, DHL, and all, what can you do to ensure that if it's infected, you don't get yourself infected?
Let me first say that the risk of being infected from those packages is extremely low. I think there's been an overhype in the social media about all these packages and you know, receiving these packages. If you get the package and you've taken, you know, you do a hand hygiene and clean up after yourself. I personally, and that's and I know that we all recognize that that risk is very, very low. So personally, I get rid of the package once I've opened it, taken what I need, do a hand hygiene, clean up around me, and that will break that transmission. But this issue of spraying the package, you know, it's almost ridiculous. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to Elizabeth to ask this. It's a very short question, but people have been asking it a lot. Can people who recover from COVID be reinfected? Elizabeth?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get off mute. That is an excellent question. I here started laughing at it. And to be honest, I don't have the data or the full literature review to comment on it. That's more on the clinical management side, and I'm more on the IPC side. So I don't want to say something that that is against what my agency is saying. I wish I could give you a better answer, but I don't dare go beyond my limited knowledge on it. But Sade, if you are laughing, perhaps you have an
no,
insight.
I think that's the $1,000 question, because the information out there, there are no antibodies. There are antibodies. We don't know. I mean, I don't think we do know yet. Some studies have shown that people who recovered did not have antibodies. Some of these populations are very old people, and we do know that could be a problem. So there's a lot of work, and I think there's still a lot we need to know to be able to make a definitive statement on that. I think the jury is still out.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's you know, some things like measles, you get it once, or chickenpox, you get it once, and presumably you don't get it again. And then there's others like malaria where you get it again and again. And this is still such a new virus. It's you know, it's baby, it's in its infancy. We're still learning how it affects people and the immune system and the ability of the immune system to fight off, or if there's, you know, maybe there's not that many antibodies, but when you are reinfected, you have an immune memory where the antibodies can then be created. So there might not be so many circulating ones. We still don't know, is the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So back to Professor Shade again. Any particular concern about, and Dorothy is asking this question, about use of toilets in aircraft? don't you think the toilet should be cleaned and sanitized after each use?
My suggestion, yeah, yes, it should be. I suspect that we're going to have, if I was to, my advice would be that there should be antiseptic wipes, that you wipe the seat and wipe the area, and it should be cleaned after. I doubt if the cabin crew will be cleaning after every passenger, but I think every passenger can clean up after themselves with antiseptic wipes and do a hand hygiene and then move on. The whole idea is to break that cycle. And don't forget, even this is my thought. I suspect some things would occur, maybe the ventilation within the toilet area might be increased. I mean, those are the kind of things I would, the airflow, and it's already there to remove smell. So I suspect that the ventilation within there, and if you are using your mask and you do a hand hygiene immediately after you're done, and you clean up after yourself with the antiseptic wipes that should be provided, it should be minimal. There's nothing like zero risk, really. And I think if everybody is responsible and the airline does their bit and we do our bit, most of us will be safe. And safety is a relative thing, but mostly safe.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me throw this. I'm struggling to see a WHO. I know we have WHO HQ people attending, and even Afro. If you are on, there's a specific question here that says WHO guidance on masks states masks should only be used by healthcare workers, caretakers, or by people who are sick with symptoms like fever and cough. Can you educate us more? I think I know of a. Anyway, let me allow any WHO person sitting on the panelists to answer this question.
Okay. Well, I don't know if there's any WHO. Hello.
Prof, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. The question was about medical masks.
Masks, yeah. WHO guidance on masks.
Yes, is that we should leave medical masks for those who are in contact with people who actually have the disease. And the rest of us should wear cloth masks. There have been quite a number of guidances that have come out to give advice on making more effective cloth masks. Let me mention that the things that guide a mask or a cloth covering in terms of its safety profile is the pore size, its electrostatic nature, its absorbency, its ability to resist liquids. And a number of studies have come out that suggest that if you use layers that have different properties, you can really optimize the cloth mask. But let me also caution here that cloth masks are more useful if all of us are masked, because they act as a source control and absorb the droplets. When the droplets, if you're not coughing and you're just talking, most of what's coming out of your mouth, it's not coming out under force. So most of it is coming out as droplets, and they'll be absorbed. But if you cough, some things will fly out. But we found that even with the cloth mask, it reduces the distance traveled, it reduces the volume. So if many of us and all of us are wearing it, then we're all safer than if some wear and some don't. The problem that I have seen is not so much whether it's cloth mask or not. It's that people wear them inappropriately. You go around, so one more thing, when you wear cloth masks, it needs to fit well. So cloth masks that are falling and you're constantly pulling them up and pulling them up is not assisting anybody. So you find people do things like they wear their cloth mask, their nose, it's starting from their mouth, it ignores the face, or they've worn it properly, then they want to speak, and then they remove it to speak to you, then they wear it immediately after. They've defeated the purpose of the cloth mask. So cloth masks are useful for and reduce transmission if we're all wearing it, because it acts as source control for everybody. Now, but if someone definitely has COVID, then we want to increase the layer of protection by saying go for something that we know we know how well it works. So use a medical mask, which has good absorbent properties and will take in those droplets. Nothing is perfect. So if the medical mask is not working very well or is loose on the face, it also has its own issues. But we do know that medical masks are more protective. We do know that there's a glove. I mean, we have the supplies worldwide is not enough to deal with a number of cases we have. So we need to make sure that those who are definitely in danger's way have the right thing. And those of us that, as we're walking around, I mean, walking by someone who has COVID is not going to give you COVID. You need to be, in general close contact. And maybe I should address the WHO document that came out. It hasn't changed things significantly. All it is saying is that in the community, there are certain situations where airborne transmission can be enhanced. So it's almost like saying in the hospital, yes, it's contact for most, but there are aerosol generating procedures. In the community, it's mostly contact and droplets. However, I mean, it's mostly contact and droplets. However, there are situations where aerosol generation can occur and spread. So, and those situations are quite in closed spaces where you have people talking, and especially if you have something that's moving the aerosols around so that they're reaching people quite rapidly, like where you have air conditioners on in a closed space and you have a lot of people, then you're going to have the likelihood for aerosol transmission increases. So my answer in a nutshell is cloth masks protect us if we're all wearing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Elizabeth again from CDC. If I could just place a little, before we go on to the next question, a little plug. As you know, CDC and WHO have a global webinar series. Tomorrow, it will actually focus in on masks, and it will include a woman who has found a way of making a very good cloth mask, which will give detailed instructions, which has been tested at Stanford and tested, I think, also in Europe. And it shows it has very close to the same filtration efficiency as the medical masks that Sade was referring to. So it could be a very good template for how to people to make cloth masks that will be very useful in the community, while we can save the medical mask for the healthcare workers. So I encourage people, if they're interested in this topic of masks, to listen in tomorrow. It'll be at 3 p.m. Nairobi time. And I have already put in a link maybe 1 or 2 days ago in the Telegram group for how to register for that webinar. So if you're interested in masks, it'll be in about an hour and a half, everything you want to know about masks tomorrow. Sorry for that advertising.
Thanks.
No, I think that is fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, before we leave, Prof, just one quick, I needed to respond very quickly to it because it's very topical. We're in Africa. Somebody wants to know what are the IPC consideration for when you get on a motorcycle. We use motorcycle a lot in Africa. So
well,
I know we have what we call the Okada rider. So please, can you comment on that? Thank you.
Okay. The motorcycle. Two people sit, both facing the forward, and you're in open air. Now, I'm not an engineer. I would just say, please wear your mask. But because it's open air and you're moving, there's a lot of airflow. I cannot tell you for sure because I truly have not measured or know how to do so, what the dynamics would be with someone sitting behind someone on a motorbike. But just from my sort of top of the head, I think the risk will be low, but you need to do your hand hygiene afterwards. But I would wear a mask because essentially the person in front, if he coughs, I don't know how the wind moves his droplets backwards. I doubt if it will be much of a risk, but it is not impossible. But I really don't have any information that I can give you with certainty. But that's an interesting question, and I think I would check it up and see if anything has been done in terms of air movements during moving on a motorbike. I don't know if anybody has any information that might add to that.
Thank you very much. Let me throw this question to anybody on the panelist section to handle. And I've seen a lot of it. I've scrolled past them, but I think we need to look at it. In Africa, we have some of these guidances that we've been talking about since in the morning, but sometimes maybe we don't respect them, or people may not respect them. What do you think are the best, maybe very short, are the best way to enforce compliance with some of our IPC guidance? Is this legislation? Is it through continuous engagement and keep talking to people until we have some behavioral change? Any person who wants to comment and add more information on that, because I see quite a number of questions on the Q&A on that. Over.
Okay, the guidance, you mean guidance for airports and airlines, or just general?
At the point of entry, the airports, even on the plane, getting people to really practice those IPC guidances. Do we need more enforcement? Do we need to risk communication? What more do you need to get Africans to imbibe it as part of standard practice?
Okay. First of all, I think we do need enforcement. If you say, don't come into this building without wearing a mask, then the person at the entrance of that building should not allow anybody to come into that building, whether rich or poor, fat or thin, to come into that building. So enforcement is important. Once you've done that once or twice or thrice, people will come into that building only masked, and it must be a proper mask. But that also requires two things. It means that the person you're putting at the entrance understands and knows that there will be a consequence if he does not, if they find people who are not wearing masks in there. And it also speaks to leadership by example. There's no point talking about people coming into somewhere and doing certain things, and then the leadership is doing the opposite. People don't do what you say, they do what you do. So if the leadership is always properly masked and do all the things that we've been asked to do, it's easier to translate that down the line. That's one. Two, many people are training. And many people are training without linking the why this is happening, and so that people are not totally understanding. So if you say, wear a mask, okay. But I go around and I'm seeing people wearing masks. They are very diligent about wearing masks, but that mask is under their nose. So clearly they don't understand that the mask is supposed to cover their nose, or that the virus enters through the nose. So somewhere along the line, people don't understand the relationship between what we're asking them to do and how it's really going to solve their problem. And then we have the final one, in that people are not seeing people dying on the street. So there are a lot of people who don't believe that COVID-19 really exists. And the behavior of our leaders and some of us in authority is helping it either. So I think it's multifactorial, and there's a lot of work to be done. As I said, when COVID, everybody was afraid of COVID. We thought we would see what was happening in Europe, people dying, but even if we're doing that, you're not going to see it on the television with people dying and all that, but they're not seeing it. So they're wondering, is there really COVID in Africa? So there's still a bit of disbelief.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. We have just 3 minutes more, but I really have to put in this question. First is, where will passengers get the hand sanitizers and disinfectants on plane? No one is allowed to carry fluids with more than 100 mils. Then, Prof, also, should people cough with their masks on, or they should first remove and cough in a flex elbow? I know you've addressed these points over and over, but it's so important that we need to keep repeating and answering them when people ask. Over. 1 minute,
Thank you.
Prof.
I will answer that first. Cough with your mask on and cough, and still cough into that elbow. It reduces the, don't forget, when you cough in a mask, it doesn't mean nothing comes out. So still cough into your elbow. The less that goes out, the better. What was the second question? Where do hand sanitizers? I truly do not know what the volume is, but I know part of it is that airlines and airports, there will be hand sanitizers at regular spots. I don't think anybody will be against a small volume of hand sanitizer, 15 mil. So have a small one. I don't think that is something that people will. And then finally, there was something I saw here that I just wanted to mention. Somebody said, what about disinfection tunnels? It's a no-no. It has no value. The virus is in the lungs and in the throat. So putting people through a disinfection tunnel is more about the razzmatazz. The person walks out and the virus still comes out if he coughs. So nothing has been achieved. No, and they're potentially dangerous. Thank you very much. I just read that, so I needed to answer it.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you to all the panelists. Among the set of questions that were asked, how do we get the presentations? The presentations will be sent to your email address used in registering for this webinar. The last set of questions I will let Anna answer it. How do we get attestation of attending this webinar? Anna, yeah, I will hand over back to you and you can answer that question. Over and out.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. I just want to let everybody know the attestation is you had to download the app from Socion, the participation app, as we already said a few times. If you downloaded the app, you will be able to scan the start code and the end code of each session. And then as soon as you've done that, you will get your attestation. If you look on the app, you will see there's an attestation. You can actually print it and download that as well. The code only is valid for each session. Each session has got their own codes. So normally the codes are available on the platform for at least 4 hours. And we've got archive from Socion on as well, if there's any other questions. But we've done this to try and give you some sort of proof that you've attended the presentation. And the attestation is just for you to put in your folder to show that you've actually attended the webinars that we've produced. And we are going to start in about a week or 2 time again with the next series. And we will also have the QR codes. So I would suggest that you, in the meantime, download the app on your cell phones, get it ready, and then as soon as the sessions start, you will be able to scan the start code and at the end code. We always also posted it on the Telegram. So please make sure that you register on the Telegram. You can just use the link, go on and register yourself on the Telegram, and you'll see all the information on there. If you do have a problem, you can email it to us, and we will try and see how we can assist with that. Thank you to everybody. You'll see there's also some questions on the screen. If you can all just answer the questions for us. I'll give you 2 minutes. Rosalind, I see you're asking about the scanning of the app. You have to download the app and then you can scan the codes. And if you look into Telegram, you'll see both the codes are posted in the Telegram. So even after this session ends, you will still be able to see that in the Telegram. We want to thank everybody. We want to really appreciate the time that you've spent by attending the webinars. And as I said, we will have 2 more series in the next week or 2. and there will be some advertisements going out. All the presentations will also be sent to all of you, and it will also be uploaded onto our web pages. So you can visit the African CDC webpage or ICANN's webpage, and you will be able to get all the presentations and all the information that you need. Thank you very much. And we want to thank everybody and have a good day.